Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, how are you?
I'm doing well. Good to see you again, Senator.
I'm a big fan. Director Peters, you're the director of the Bureau of Prisons, is that right?
That's correct, sir.
You used to run the correction system in Oregon, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Oregon legalized drugs, is that right?
That's correct.
Oregon's about to reverse that, is that correct?
Senator, I'm not familiar with the policy proposed to reverse that.
Oh, you've just ignored Oregon?
Oregon still has a very special place in my heart, sir.
Okay. You haven't read any of the articles about the reversal?
I haven't, Senator.
You don't know anything about it?
Correct, sir.
Okay, wow. You're in charge of implementing the First Step Act, Director?
That's correct.
How many criminals have you released under the First Step Act?
So First Step Act for the overall release since the initiation of the First Step Act is, I have that exact number in front of me.
You don't know off the top of your head?
Sorry, Senator. So 70% of those that were released, we have about 30,000 individuals that have been released since the passage of the First Step Act.
All right, so you've released 30,000 criminals under the First Step Act. Okay? And how many of them, before you released them, did you contact any of their victims to say we're about to let this guy out?
Senator, it's my understanding that that notification happens through the U.S. Attorney's Office, but I will check into that and get back to you.
You don't know?
Senator, I don't.
Have you followed up with the U.S. attorneys to say, do you have a system to say, hey, we're about to let this guy out? Would you, we want to be sure the victim's contacted?
As a former victim's advocate, I share that value, that victim notification should happen. I'll check on the process.
But you don't know if it's happening?
That's correct, Senator.
Wow. Okay, of the 30,000 criminals you let free, how many of them have come back? Have committed a crime again, hurt somebody else?
So that number is one that we're still looking at as it relates to the recidivism rate for those that were released on the First Step Act.
You don't have any idea?
No, Senator.
You don't have anybody at the Bureau that can count?
I do not have that number in front of me today.
So let me get this straight. The First Step Act was passed in 2018. This is 2024. Am I right so far?
That's correct.
That's 6 years. And in 6 years, you've let 30,000 criminals go, right?
That's correct.
And you don't have the slightest idea how many of them committed another crime and came back.
I don't have that number in front of me today,
And you
sir.
run the Bureau of Prisons.
That's correct.
And how many employees do you have?
About 40,000 employees.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. General, I know you got a lot to do, but could you give us a hand here? And let's find out whether the First Step Act worked. And how many, if we've released 30,000 criminals after 6 years, our director here doesn't know how many have committed another crime and come back? Can you help us?
Senator, I can certainly follow up on that issue. I will just say in terms of work we've done in the past, for example, on compassionate release and going to the Bureau of Prisons, this is before Director Peters was there, and asking them for data on compassionate release because that was one of the issues that has come up.
Excuse me for interrupting, but I'm not talking about compassionate release.
No, I understand.
My colleagues said we were told that it would save money and it would be in the interest of public safety to release criminals from prison. I didn't vote for it, but the majority rules. And so Congress did it. And Ms. Peters, Director Peters at the Bureau of Prisons, and her colleagues released 30,000 criminals, all of whom are there for a reason, okay? They didn't just go to prison for a free toaster. They were there for a reason. And so her department let them go. And after 6 years, we don't have the slightest idea, not a single one of the 40,000 of her employees know how many have committed a second crime and come back. So how the hell are we supposed to figure out whether it worked?
Senator,
Your people ought to hide their head in a bag, Director, that you can't come here in front of this Congress and answer that question. I'm sorry. I interrupted you with my speech.
No, that's okay. I was just going to, my bottom line point on it was, I've often looked to those questions on things like compassionate release and other programs. And one of the challenges we found is the department just doesn't have good data on that. Halfway houses. Congress is spending about $500 million a year on halfway houses. There's really not great recidivism data on that either. How well are they working?
Before we do this, we need to find out. Look, I believe in justice. I believe in treating everybody fairly. But there are people out there, I don't know why, if I make it to heaven, I'm going to ask. They're not mixed up. They're not confused. They're not sick. It's not that their mama or daddy didn't love them or not enough. They just hurt other people, and they take other people's stuff, and we have to separate them from society. And the director let 30,000 of these folks go and can't tell me today how many have come back. I just find it takes my breath away. With 40,000 people. How many of your 40,000 people are actually coming to work or are still working from home, Director?
The supermajority of our employees come to work every day because we're running 24/7
What percentage are coming to work every day?
The percentage is quite high. I don't have the exact
You
number.
don't know?
But
Well, maybe there's your problem.
the supermajority of our individuals come to
If
work
they're not coming
at
to
our
work, they
institutions.
can't give us the answer. I've gone over. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. This is why people hate government and don't trust government.
So I'd like to respond concerning the Grassley-Durbin First Step Act signed into law by
I thought you might have a response.
by President Donald Trump. I almost want to repeat that because this notion that it's soft on crime, I don't consider Chuck Grassley soft on crime. I don't consider Donald Trump soft on crime. Let me tell you the numbers that we have. Some 30,000 released. The recidivism rate for people released under the First Step Act is 12.4%. 7 out of every 8 individuals released under the law have not been rearrested or charged with a new crime. By comparison, DOJ estimates that in the decade before the First Step Act was passed, 43% of the people formerly incarcerated in BOP were rearrested within 3 years of their release. Is the First Step Act working? I would submit it is.
Would you yield for a question, Mr. Chair?
When I finish.
I'm sorry. Excuse me for interrupting.
The point I'm making is we decided with the Trump administration and Senator Grassley's leadership that we were going to take a different approach to releasing people from prison. We would give them an opportunity to be trained, educated, skilled, in many ways more prepared for release, because 80%, I believe, in the system are going to be released someday. We don't want to commit another crime or create another victim. I would submit this is a success. Don't put your head in a bag or whatever Senator suggested. Stand up tall and try to make it better, and I'm ready to do that. But the First Step Act was a constructive reform of the penal system, and I think it was a good idea and stand by it. I'll submit to your question.
Thank you. And I appreciate, as usual, Dick, you make good points. Here's my point. I didn't vote for the First Step Act because I was afraid this was going to happen. And what I hear you saying is that of the 30,000 that the director released, over 3,000 committed another crime and are back. Here's my question. How come you know that and she doesn't?
Because she's probably looking
And the
for
40,000 people at Bureau of Prisons who are supposed to give us this information don't know.
I'd like to say in all fairness, she's under oath, and I think when you ask for numbers, she wants to make sure she tells you a number she can live with. I have this information. I think it's probably close to being 100% accurate, but I wouldn't say under oath it is. So I think give her a fair opportunity to respond. I mean, it just might not be the type of thing that comes
But
rolling
you're
off
not,
the tongue.
it's not your job, and I appreciate the information, and I'd like to see the study that shows that. I just don't understand why the director has no idea.
Well,
She didn't say she was uncertain, and she wanted to go back and check. She said, I don't know. And I just find that extraordinary.
I'm assuming since she's under oath, it's an honest answer. We have 2 other individuals who are seeking a second round. I believe Senator Booker is first.
I hate to distract from my questions, but I just want to defend the bipartisan work that we all did. 86 senators voted for it, and the dramatic drop in recidivism rates that is not the Bureau of Prisons' job to track, it's the Justice Department's job to track it, is stunning. I mean, this has literally saved the United States of America hundreds of millions of dollars. It has lowered crime. The data shows we max people out in prison, don't prepare them. You can't keep them by law. So when people max out and don't have halfway houses, don't have the kind of resources that people that were released during this have, their recidivism rates are through the charts. So we have to be smart on crime. And one of the biggest growths of bureaucracy I've seen in my life is a prison industrial complex in the United States of America, and it's not making us safer. So I understand that. And then the second thing, in your defense, the mission of the BOP is not to necessarily track folks after they're gone. From what I understand, having done a lot of reading and prep for a later hearing, that's not your mission. Your mission is to hold them securely, prepare them, programs, so forth. So if we want to get Senator Kennedy, if we want to get the head of the Justice Department, I'm all for grilling them, but you're one of these folks that we're giving you too little resources to do too much work. And that's what I'd like to jump into. And I have a lot of frustrations, obviously, with what's going on. But I've watched you now as a professional struggle mightily to meet the demands that are put on you in a moment where Congress is not giving you the resources necessary to do your job, even in facilities that are outrageously decrepit. I mean, your FY22 is estimated that the BOP needs $2 billion in funding to repair facilities, but the BOP, this is my challenge to you, has requested $200 million for infrastructure repairs. Congress allocated $59 million, but is it not true that people are dying in your facilities because there's no air conditioning?
Senator, your data points around the maintenance and repair backlog are absolutely spot on, and that number has grown since we last reported that $2 billion. It is now closer to $3 billion because we continue to have roofs that are crumbling. We continue to have HVACs that have stopped working. And if you look at the amount of money that we typically get from Congress, it's about $100,000 a year to solve that $3 billion problem. And the cost of one roof replacement alone is $1 million.
Yeah, and I just point this out to say again, this is a pattern here. Your employees could literally leave your job and not make 10% more, 20% more, but 100% more. And not have to work hours. And you know this, and I'm going to bring this out in the hearing later on today. When you have to hold somebody over on a shift, what does that do to a family suddenly where they can't pick up their kids for school?
Senator, I hear it all the time when I'm walking the halls of our institutions. It isn't just the physical wear and tear and mental wear and tear of that overtime and augmentation. It is what impacts their family.
Yeah, I talked to the Capitol Police when we had them working, held over on shifts. They just weren't allowed to leave. And now suddenly their whole family is in crisis.
That's right. We hear all the time. They had their week planned out on who was picking the kids up from daycare, who was cooking, and the Federal Bureau of Prisons messes with that schedule day in and day out for our families.
Yeah, and we preach how much we support law enforcement. This is utterly shameful. A February 2024 GEO report found that by October 2023, the BOP housed approximately 8% of its prison population in solitary confinement. One of the things I'd like for you to address is the report noted significant racial disparities, with black individuals comprising less than half, 38% of the total federal prison population, but represented over half, 59% of those in solitary. Can you address that for me?
Yes, Senator, and this is an issue that's been studied across the country, both in federal corrections and in state corrections. And often what we find is the level of gang activity that happens inside our institutions often drives that number. That's still unacceptable to me. I think we have so much work to do in restrictive housing reform, and we have to ask those hard questions about the disproportionate number of individuals of minority status who are in restrictive housing.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that's something my staff can work with you on as well. And then the final thing I just want to say is the chairman said it. I think there's room for a lot of bipartisan work here to try to address these issues. the shamefulness of what's happening as a result of the lack of funding for facilities, for personnel, and for certain position line items is outrageous implications of the United States of America and its support of law enforcement officers and creating inhumane conditions in prisons. The one thing the very small point to the Inspector General that was brought out, and I want to talk to Senator Cotton, who I'm going to be sitting with, chairing and is the ranking on this committee, is this idea of the inability to jam cell phone signals, and the fact that it's a misdemeanor to bring in something that you said under oath is a tantamount to a deadly weapon. And I'm wondering, number one, on the jamming issue, the only pushback my staff could say that they get is the need for federal public defenders when meeting with their client to be able to access the internet. Is there a workaround that you see to that concern? And then number two, do you think it would be enough of a deterrent if it was suddenly not a misdemeanor but a felony?
Yes, Senator. I think on both those issues, there's certainly a workaround. I think one of the issues, I think Senator Cotton had it right, the FCC and the technology companies have opposed it or raised concerns about it, in part because of the inability, I think, and Director Peters can speak to this as well, to limit the jamming or limit the interference to the grounds itself of the facility, as opposed to some of the perimeter areas, particularly where there are homes nearby. And so I think those are some of the issues that have been at issue here. But many state prisons have been doing this for years. California has been involved in jamming technology. We've done work in this space, our office, over the years, and have seen other states successfully do it. So it's clearly doable. We're glad to see the BOP moving forward, but there are some areas they have to be careful about.
But the misdemeanor to the felony,
yeah.
I mean, if somebody is caught sneaking a cell phone in, they're fired, right? They lose their job. Is that not enough of a deterrent?
Here's the issue. From a union standpoint, if they're a union member, there is an ability to litigate that question on a misdemeanor. A felony charge, if someone's convicted of a felony charge, my understanding is they're out. My understanding is if it's a misdemeanor or never prosecuted, and as you know, if it's only a misdemeanor, federal prosecutors are not taking these cases. So no one's getting prosecuted for a misdemeanor, right? There's lots of felonies to be prosecuted. So the problem is they're not being prosecuted, and that leaves it to the BOP's administrative process only to deal with the problem.
Yes.
And that sometimes does not, as I understand it, result in removal of individuals. And I have multiple examples. I'm happy to come speak to your staff about them and to you as well, where we have had cases involving sexual assaults that were the result of some grooming, bringing in foods of misdemeanor. Well, think about how that's an enticement to female inmates potentially, and a grooming tool. And it just shouldn't happen.
No, I agree with you. And not to be a little lighthearted on this, but I want you to clarify for the record, when you say that nobody is prosecuted for federal misdemeanors, that's not an invitation to anybody on this dais to commit misdemeanors.
You are correct. Yeah. And there are rare occasions where there are misdemeanor charges brought, but almost every U.S. Attorney's office in the country has lots of felony cases.
Okay, because Senator Durbin's staff, I just want to make sure they heard that. They should not do federal misdemeanors. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for the help, Senator. Senator Ossoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the second opportunity. On this point about disciplinary procedures, it's the Office of Internal Affairs at BOP that handles internal investigations of staff misconduct, correct, Director?
That's correct. As soon as we refer all allegations to the Office of the Inspector General, once they review and determine that there's nothing criminal in nature, then they kick it back to us and we engage in the administrative investigation.
So let's update on the OIA backlog. PSI investigation a couple years ago into the sexual assault of female inmates in BOP facilities found that there was about 8,000 backlogged cases at OIA. And at that time, about 2 years ago, BOP told us that it would take about 2 years to clear the backlog. BOP just provided to my office an update that there are still over 7,300 pending cases before OIA. So that's about a 7% reduction. You said publicly, I think in a CBS interview last month, that it would take about 2 years to clear the OIA backlog. So 2 years ago, BOP said 2 years to clear the backlog. This year, BOP says 2 years to clear the backlog. Why, and when will it be cleared?
Thank you, Senator. So I, too, share your frustration in the time it's taking to clear the backlog, but it hasn't been for lack of a plan. So as I shared with you, we had just under 30 employees in the Office of Internal Affairs. And since you and I last spoke, it simply took us until last fall to get those positions filled. And so now we're at about 150 individuals who are in the Office of Internal Affairs who report directly to headquarters so that there's that centralized oversight that you wanted. We now have them fully trained, and we're just starting to see a chip down of that backlog. But we're not just looking at the backlog. We're looking at other ways to clear the backlog by looking at, as an example, how many of these investigations could actually be handled at a lower level, at the warden level. If you have an employee that comes in and is 5 minutes late, you're considered AWOL. That AWOL gets kicked to the Office of Internal Affairs. We're asking the question, does that really need to be investigated by a special investigative agent at headquarters, or is that something the warden can handle? And then would it be more swift and sure action?
So I'm glad to hear you've added capacity and personnel and you're looking at changing procedures. So when will it be cleared?
So I asked for that exact update before this hearing because I knew you would ask, and the answer is we are hoping to have it cleared within the next 2 years.
2 years. Well, I hope this is the last time that it'll be, again, 2 years, but I do appreciate the effort that you've clearly invested into trying to rectify this. Getting back to some of the staffing issues and staff compensation and retention incentives, and again, I hope that we can work together to find additional tools for retention and recruitment at USP Atlanta in particular. But we've been talking about how BOP personnel are underpaid. And they can't, you can't compete in this labor market against other law enforcement agencies. We talked about health staff. So how much more do they need to be paid?
Thank you, Senator. So right now we have about 45% of our employees receiving some form of incentive. And what we're finding in communities like New York, the New York Department of Corrections, you can get paid 2 or 3 times more for working for them. So the answer varies depending on where our facilities are and what issues we're faced with. In rural areas, we're faced with just having saturated the market, and we've hired everybody that lives in those areas. In the urban areas, we're competing, as I said earlier, with fast food chains and grocery stores.
So understand that these labor markets are regional. Let's try it this way. How much more in the next fiscal year does BOP need to be appropriated in order to resolve the fact that you can't currently offer competitive salaries? What's the number?
Thank you, Senator. I don't have that number today, but we're looking at proposing a new salary rate table. And so my HR team is working on that data right now. So we will have that during our next budget ask.
And what concerns me is, you've got to go to DOJ, and then DOJ has to go to OMB and justify your annual budget request. And OMB is going to come back and say, well, why do you need this many more hundreds of millions or billions of dollars for personnel? And if you can't justify that through some rigorous demonstration, some rigorous analysis, then your request for the PBR is going to get denied. So for the next presidential budget cycle, are you going to have a specific number, a specific appropriation that you need from the Congress that's backed up by rigorous analysis in order to resolve this competitive salaries issue?
We hope to have that number not just in the recruitment and retention category, but the other main crisis issue around maintenance and repair backlog.
Okay, I'm just my last point was just, I mentioned earlier my team's trying to look at this staffing tool. I can't, the Senate Judiciary Committee accesses a lot of sensitive information. We conduct a lot of rigorous oversight. We're asking to come and review a tool that you use to determine staffing levels. Racking my brain sitting here, I can't think of any reason why your Office of Legislative Affairs would deny my staff and members of this committee the opportunity to view how that tool functions. I can't think of any reason at all. So we need to get our teams together, get in the room, look at the tool, see how it works, okay?
Thank you, Senator. I've said again and again, we want to be as transparent as possible. I suspect the reason is that it's still a work in progress.
Well, we can look at
considered
we can
deliberative.
look at works in progress.
I'm happy to have this conversation with you. We've even talked around the executive team if we would be able to, once the product is completed, have it be an outward-facing product so that the public could even see it. That's still being deliberated by individuals inside our organization, but I'm happy
Yeah,
to work with you,
please just
Senator.
let my team have a look.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ossoff, and I want to thank all the members who participated in this hearing today. I made this a special item in the agenda of the committee to focus on corrections, because I felt for a long time that we're fast and loose when it comes to sentencing and criminal procedure and the like, and we ought to see what happens next for those who are, in fact, convicted and are incarcerated as a result of it. Historically, I know some great people have had things to say about corrections. One of them I quoted before was Nelson Mandela, who himself spent 18 years in prison on Robben Island in South Africa and then went on to be elected president of his country. But he said, "No one truly knows a nation until one has been inside its jails. A nation should not be judged on how it treats its highest citizens, but its lowest ones." The purpose of this hearing was to make it clear that a federal prison sentence should never be a death sentence. Never. And in too many circumstances, it has been. We're lucky to have you, Director Peters. I'm glad you took this job. It's a
Thank you,
tough one.
Senator.
It's a challenge, and I think you handle it well. We don't agree on everything, but that's never going to happen. But I do respect you very much for all the work that you're putting into this effort. General Horowitz, you are a treasure to this government and to this country. You keep us honest, and that's your job, and you do it well. We're lucky to have you. And I want to say for all of the workers in the Bureau of Prisons, but especially those who are at risk in the discharge of their duties, thank you. We could not keep this country safe without you, and I appreciate all of those at every level in the Bureau of Prisons who make that possible. There'll be some questions for the record. You've seen them before. You better respond or Senator Grassley will remind you that you didn't. And others will too. I don't want to pick on Chuck, but he loves to get his letters answered. So thanks for being here today, and this hearing stands adjourned.
Thank you, Senator.